Welcome to another Silicon Bytes, and this episode is looking at the apparent collapse of popularity in Donald Trump's regime. Before we get into that, thank you to everybody who is supporting our fundraiser to put on more events this year. So far, they've had a great impact. Ones we put on in Ukraine in January and an event we organised in London just a couple of weeks ago. Well, the next ones are going to be in Lviv, Kiev, Odessa, and we've got more events to come in Berlin, London, Oxford, and of course other places as well. Let's get into the episode. There are indications that all is not well in the dark Narnia of Trump's administration. As President Trump approaches the first 100 days of his second term, a Fox News poll suggests that core voters, as well as swing voters, have concerns about the direction of travel. 82% are extremely or very concerned about inflation, while a new low of 38% approve on the economy. That is 56% disapprove. His worst ratings are on inflation. That is 33% approving, 59% disapproving, followed by tariffs, 33 to 58 approval versus non-approval. Foreign policy is 40% approval, 54% disapproving. And on taxes, 38% approving, 53% disapproving. And finally, on guns, which is an interesting one, 41% approve, 44% disapprove. About the only issue that registers satisfaction is border security, on which a majority of 55% approves on the direction of Trump's administration. And this relates also to an upturn in satisfaction on the issue of immigration. But even here, 47% approve of Trump's policy, while a slightly larger number, 48%, disapprove. Overall, approval of Trump's job creation performance comes in at just 44%, down 5 points from the 49% approval in March of this year. This may seem extraordinary that so many still approve given the chaos he is presiding over, but focus groups suggest that swing votes don't have the same alarm about his authoritarian slide in the US or the catastrophic economic policies unfolding with his tariffs as many experts do. As we saw in Brexit, voters may tend towards normalizing the abnormal, and indeed the media is a willing accomplice in this process. It's not until the economic impact of the chaos really bites that some will reassess their views. Even then, many will seek to blame others for the issues, not the main culprit, the cause of them, or will continue to rationalize the problems in order not to face the impact of their own decisions or even political indifference. Now, this is lower than the approval of Joe Biden, which came in at 54%, Barack Obama at 62%, and George W. Bush 63% at the 100-day mark of their presidencies. It's also lower by 1% compared to Trump's 45% approval rating at this point 8 years ago. Some 59% of voters are unhappy with how things are going in the country. That's an improvement since the end of former President Biden's term. 68% were dissatisfied, but worse than 4 years ago at the beginning of Biden's term, when 53% were dissatisfied. Again, extraordinary given that the US economy is now faltering, when under Biden it was booming. But there was a failure to communicate that success on the part of Democrats, indeed a failure to ensure that distribution of wealth and the largesse of a booming economy was felt by all. Inequality, inefficiency, and corporate manipulation of the system has progressively alienated many voters, especially from Washington and its politics. Their chosen leader is ironically the person least likely to deliver the changes that would improve their lives, but he is a master of populist political rhetoric. This popularity rating is also worse than the 100-day mark of Trump's first term, as I say, which was at 53%. Since his inauguration in January, satisfaction amongst Democrats has turned to dissatisfaction and vice versa amongst Republicans. Dissatisfaction remains steady among the independents. The impact of Trumponomics is starting to be felt, even if voters don't yet fully associate the problems with the architect of their woes. Voters remain gloomy about the economy as 71% rate economic conditions negatively and 55% say it's getting worse for their family. Both of those numbers are slight improvements compared to where they stood in December. Only 28% say it feels like things are getting better, and a 22-point margin more think Trump's policies are hurting rather than helping the economy. Longer term expectations are also gloomy, with a narrower 11-point margin when voters are asked what they expect from his policies in the long run. 40% say they will help, versus 51% who say the policies will hurt. The work of Doge is emblematic of the chaos for many liberals and most observers in Western Europe, but it seems that perceptions are different within the US. Regarding the Department of Government Efficiency's efforts to reform the federal government, almost half of American voters say it's likely Doge will make government more efficient. That's 49%. Improve the economy, 47%, and improve government services, 46%, while fewer expect that it will lower their taxes, only 43%. A slight majority, 52%, say the Trump administration has not been competent and effective in managing the federal government. That is unchanged, however, from the number who said the same thing in 2017. Given the breadth and scale of Doge activities, as well as the credible reports of overreach and illegality, inefficiency, incompetence, in fact, its role as a wrecking ball of historic proportions, it's remarkable that this figure does not seem to have fed through to voters' concerns, remarkable that it has not changed at all over all these years. It's also likely that coverage by the mainstream media has not really focused on the negatives of Doge and certainly has had no impact on public opinion at all. In the list of things that concern voters, it's interesting to see that 8 in 10 voters are concerned about political divisions. That is a huge figure at 78%. They voted for Trump, the most divisive candidate in modern American history, whose brand is about attacking, about division and discord. And yet they would still like to see more cooperation between politicians. About 7 in 10 feel the same about healthcare as a key issue, 76%. Government spending is a concern for 73%, and the imminent chances of a recession, 72%. Two-thirds or fewer are worried about immigration, 66%. Iran getting a nuclear bomb is also at 66% of people's concerns. Russia's invasion of Ukraine at 61%, and the stock market 58. We'll call out the Ukraine one because this is very interesting. If this high figure of the electorate that find Ukraine is a key concern could be communicated more forcibly to American politicians, I think this would be a good thing. If Trump was to see it not as a political football and the war as all the fault of Biden, for instance, but something that American voters genuinely care about, then we might see some changes in government policy. Well, that's the optimistic take on it. While there's bipartisan concern about inflation, the parties are split on other issues. Anxiety about a recession and healthcare are the top issues for Democrats, while Republicans worry more about government spending and immigration. Republican pollster Darren Shaw, who conducts surveys for Fox News, together with Democrat Chris Anderson, says as we've moved from one administration to another and the Trump administration tries to find its footing, many still see our leaders as unresponsive to their main concerns. He went on to say, partisans have flipped, of course, so now it's Democrats who are most worried, but many independents and Republicans are also skeptical their economic fears are not being addressed. Nearly three-quarters, 72%, believe tariffs will drive up the cost of products, including majorities of Democrats at 88%, independents at 76%, and Republicans 55. A record 55% think tariffs hurt the economy. And a majority say they hurt US jobs. 44% say hurt versus 36 who think it might help. Two-thirds worry a trade war with China could escalate into a military confrontation. Well, more on that later, because this is one area of extreme weakness for Trump, and the impact of his trade wars have barely even begun to be felt yet. Two-thirds say the president cannot ignore court rulings, and voters are significantly more concerned by a 19-point margin about the president disregarding the judiciary than about the courts overstepping their authority. This is, of course, interesting and another core area that the Trump regime seems intent on challenging in the weeks ahead. Among Republicans, 36% agree the judiciary is legitimately exercising its power, and a slim 51% majority say the president can't ignore court rulings. This, of course, is an area to watch, but again, partisan media outlets may not feed voters with a complex and nuanced view of the actions and impact of the president on the judiciary, but rather may feed people's biases, prejudices, and aspirations. The judiciary may be eroded without most voters realizing that it has already happened. While Trump may feel he's on favorable ground when arguing about immigration with Democrats, there are obvious risks to pushing it too far, says Anderson. One risk is that he's seen as doing it at the expense of economic issues, which concern voters more than immigration. Another is in ignoring the courts and losing supporters who see values in checks and balances within the system. 89% of those who supported Trump in 2024 remain satisfied with their choice. That's down from 92% who felt that way 4 years ago and 97% 8 years ago. Overall, 85% say they are still satisfied with their vote for president, including 90% of Kamala Harris supporters. This cements the idea that the US is deeply divided along partisan lines, and that the structure of traditional media and indeed algorithmic biases of social media may be entrenching voters in their positions and may ensure they are not exposed to information that may counter their beliefs, biases, and prejudices. Investors are more likely than non-investors to approve of Trump's job performance on the economy, inflation, tariffs, and taxes, and they rate economic conditions more positively, both for the nation and their family. While more investors are concerned about the stock market, a larger number of non-investors worry about inflation and a recession this year. Again, this is extraordinary, as the experience of Brexit was the opposite, with most experts in the UK, business leaders and investors rating the likely impact of Brexit on the UK economy as negative, while those without business experience, involvement, or who benefited from income from investments were most likely to have a positive view of Brexit. These next figures will shock people outside the US, for whom Vance and Musk have become emblematic of the chaos, the abusive and irrational politics unfolding in the US. But 42% approve of the job that JD Vance is doing as vice president, while 51% disapprove. For Elon Musk's work with Doge, 39% approve and 56% disapprove. They do both get more negative views than Trump and his performance, but that is still remarkable, perhaps, that anyone still approves of them, given the behaviours that we are seeing from them and the policies that are being enacted. Unfortunately, there are cult elements to the popularity of Trump, which rational, traditional voting behaviours cannot explain. 1/3 of those polled believe divine intervention helped secure Trump's return to the White House. 32% feel he was saved from 2 assassination attempts because God wanted him to be president again, including majorities of white evangelical Christians, 56%, Republicans, 60%, 2024 Trump supporters, 62%, and MAGA supporters, 70%. Now, all of this data was taken from a survey run by Shaw and Company Research. This is a Fox News survey from an article published on their website, and this data was collated. The survey was done. The survey was conducted from April the 18th to the 21st, 2025. This Fox survey includes a sample of 1,104 registered voters randomly selected from a national voter file. But it may not take much longer for the impact of Trump's policies to be felt by voters. Trump raised tariffs on goods from China to 145% in early April. Businesses, both large and small, depend on imports from China to survive, but small business owners are becoming increasingly desperate as their inventories dwindle and import invoices skyrocket. Tariffs seem to be imposed and withdrawn like a proverbial political yo-yo, and the back and forth is causing massive upheaval, uncertainty, and pessimism. Small businesses that operate on razor-thin margins could be months away from going out of business. And of course, these tariffs are imposed sometimes on goods that could potentially, in the longer term, be manufactured in the US, although often input costs and components will be dramatically more expensive and it takes time to repurpose the economy. But there are other things like tea, which simply cannot be grown, cannot be manufactured or produced in the US. Nonetheless, tariffs have been placed on them too. The UK's independent newspaper spoke to a family-owned business based in Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts, that has seen containers of finished products worth $500,000 stranded in China. And this company, like many others, is entirely dependent on goods being competitively manufactured in China. But it's also a question of quality manufacturing, as this particular company sells high-end luxury games. The tariff have brought the past 25 years of healthy, continuous growth to a dramatic halt. They've lost orders from three of the largest US retailers, totaling $16 million in the last 3 weeks alone. They're quoted as saying, as a small business, we don't have the runway or the capabilities to move manufacturing on a whim. The company has 22 employees. Tariffs have disrupted our business and put us on the verge of insolvency. And estimates they have suggest they have a 4-month runway to stay afloat if nothing changes. Well, this is the problem with Trump's decisions. They're seemingly taken on a whim, without any impact planning, without a clear strategy, and without a period of economic acclimatization built into the process. Voters may approve of the sentiment and logic behind the reforms, but the changes themselves are being implemented in a wrecking ball fashion. Well, more of this in the next episode of Silicon Bytes, which will look at the impact of Trump's policies on the economy of the US. But another worrying area will be to see if, rather than stepping back from the disastrous impact of his economic policies, Trump rather turns to the tools of the classic authoritarian and uses the crisis to entrench his own regime and power base by blaming others for the chaos. He may be the reason why a state of emergency is declared, but he could use that situation to accelerate the erosion of rule of law, challenge the judiciary, limit the powers of the media and legislature, and other actions that are very much part of the tried and tested toolkit of the authoritarian playbook.